So before we start, like I said, before we start creating our image planes to begin our modeling, I want to point out a couple things. We have our kind of drop-down menu here. If I mouse over it, it's our menu set. And you can see that if I go to the drop-down, we have animation, polygon, surfaces, dynamics. What this represents is that each time we click on one of these menu sets, it's going to create different menu options here. And typically we're going to work almost exclusively in our polygons. So one thing you want to make sure first is that you're in your polygons menu set drop down. And in our tabs here, in our shelf tools, we have, you might probably by default be into general, but we're going to make sure that we're starting in polygons. That is, we'll be modeling exclusively here in polygons. And you can see that we have primitive or polygon primitive creations here, and as we scroll further down we have polygon modeling tools. This is kind of how I like to work, and you'll probably see that or you've already discovered you have your own way to work. So I'll just introduce kind of one way I like to work, and then I'll introduce a second way which you might prefer to work. I always tell my students that in Maya there's at least 10 different ways to do the same operation, and through experience and work you'll find your own way to do that. So I'm just going to start with some tools, and I'm going to create a polygon cube to demonstrate that. And you can see when I click on or mouse over polygon cube, it says create a polygon cube on the grid. So if when I click on it, I get a nice verbose here in the viewport that says drag on the grid and pull. So I can do just left mouse to drag and create my cube, and then drag up to create the height to create my cube. That's one way to work, and I have my move tools to move this. So I always move tool, rotate, and scale, and you'll see that as I mouse over there is a W to the right of that move tool, that kind of menu. So if I just kind of ignore that and I hit W on my keyboard, that gives me my move tool, and I can move this left, forward. And these are really basic things that you should know before we start doing this, but I'm just giving a quick introduction because what I want to do is demonstrate that when we're working modeling organic things, or really anything, we want to kind of stay so that our axis will be mirrored on the Y, or sorry, on the X. So I'm just going to hold my shift key down and drag and scale up my cube. So now I have a completely equal distance or equal sided cube, and in my channel box here to the right you can see that I have my X, Y, Z values. So I'm just going to zero that out. Oops, I don't have numlocks on, that's why I didn't do that. You see what I did here was I just dragged in the numerical input from X down to Z for translate, hit 0. So that zeroes everything out. The problem is, if I wanted to be flat on this grid, I would want to maintain what that Y value was. But for us, I think I would like to do that. So I'm just going to undo till I come back, and I'm just going to zero out my X and my Z value. This Y value represents 3.545 in Y, because if I go Control A to go into my attribute editor and click on my third tab here, which is my polycube, which is how this cube modeling history is determined, you can see that that Y distance is half the height of 7.089. So if I went back and I just made everything, let's just say 8 by 8 by 8, and I can add subdivisions or polygon splits. I'll do that later, but if, for now it's 8 by 8, and you can see that now I'm gone through the grid. Half of that distance now of 8 would be 4, and now in my orthographic view that puts me completely flat on my modeling grid here. So just to kind of show you how measurements work from our center pivot point, the creation of our cube, and its placement in our object space. Okay, so I have what this cube is consisting of right now is 6 polygon faces. And whenever you have more than one polygon face joined together, we call this a polygon mesh. So this is a cube, but it's also a polygon mesh. If I right mouse on here, I can go into my, so I am using a 3-button mouse, which you should all be using. Right mouse button, sorry, or a Cintiq pen. Just make sure you have it's set up so that your right mouse button is going to kind of introduce a submenu set of selecting components within our object. And by components, I mean the individual sub polygon pieces that make up our polygon mesh. So if I'm just going to drag to and release my mouse button to select face, when I mouse over, which is nice in 2015 and 16, is that when I mouse over a face, it highlights that face. So if I select it, I can now move that. Remember, W for move, E, the hotkey for rotate. I can rotate that, and R to scale. And I can scale that. And I'm doing a uniform scale by selecting that center icon. And we should all be familiar with that. I'm not going to go into detail into how to scale things. But it just becomes a real fast way to model when we know how to do that. Just Control Z to go back to my cube. You can see that up here I'm highlighted in object. So this is kind of a little visual mistake or bug. Really, I'm in component mode, and when I select that, I'm in component mode. If I go back and select object, it takes me back to object mode. So just remember, object mode, if I'm scaling this, it scales the whole cube. Component mode, it remembers that by default, if I'm in component mode here, it takes me into vertex. So I'm selecting the vertex. And what I mean by vertex is, remember, I use my right mouse button before I was in face mode, right? If I right mouse button, I can go into vertex now, and I'm in vertex. It remembers my last selection, whatever that was. So just so you know, this is component mode, and this is object mode. Component mode is blue, object mode is green. There's got to be a hotkey for that, right? So I'm just going to click off so that nothing is, no vertices or faces selected. Hit F8. I'm back into object mode. So this is a thing. If I hit F8 again, I'm back into component mode. If I select a vertice and I hit F8, that works. But sometimes there's a little bit of a tricky bug where it doesn't always go back and forth quite readily. Sometimes it takes 2 hits of F8 to get back to object mode. Alright, back to some of the tools we're going to use now. Let's just click on here. You can see that we've got this multi-cut tool, which is new to 2015. Let's just, okay, I've gone back to object mode, and I'm going into my multi-cut tool here. And you can see that when I'm in multi-cut, it takes me, and I click on multi-cut tool, it takes me into component mode. It's blue. And as I mouse around, you can see it's snapping to vertices and to edges. So let's just try and do a diagonal cut. Oops. So I clicked once when that was highlighted, and I clicked a second time when I mouse over and that vertex is highlighted in red. It gives me a preview of my cut in orange, and I need to hit my enter key to execute that cut. So now I have 2 faces, and escape should get me out of that tool. It does not, but I always just like to default into just hitting the select key. I just like to be sure that I'm out of that tool by hitting select, and it's just a way I'm used to working. You'll probably find better ways to work. But if I go into, you can see I'm still in face select mode, that when I mouse over, now this cut has made this from one face, like on this side, it's made it into 2 separate faces. back into that cut tool, and now I'm just selecting or highlighting this edge in red, and I'm clicking once to initiate the cut, and I'm just going to click again to kind of cut around. You can see that as we kind of cut around, you might not get results you want. It has to maybe come back here, come back, and I'm going to hit enter, and I've got all these kind of cuts happening, which I talked about earlier about creating n-gons or 5-sided polygons, and we don't want that, but I'm just demonstrating the tool. If I wanted to be more precise with this tool, that is, I want to make a cut that's exactly halfway in between here, I can hold my shift key down and it'll snap, and then continue to hold my shift key down. You can see that now it's cutting or slicing my faces exactly at half the distance of that edge. You see when I moused over that final cut, it said close. So now this is a closed cut or a loop. And I hit enter to execute that cut. So we've made several cuts, and this 6-sided cube has now become several-sided polygon mesh. And this leads me to this kind of extrude tool. And the extrude tool is something that is going to get you into trouble. I'm going to click on it once, and what that extrude tool is, you have to kind of select a polygon face or edge or vertice to execute this tool first. And you can see I got the warning down here. You're really not going to want to extrude vertices, but you can extrude edges and faces. So I'll just demonstrate by selecting one of these faces here, and I'm going to hit extrude, and I get this nice kind of interface. And sometimes this interface gets a little glitchy. If I orbit around, it kind of will snap back. Sometimes it goes over here or far away. If you just orbit around, it should come back close to where you want to be. So if I zoom in, come around, it should always kind of follow us. Thickness, I'm just going to left mouse on thickness, and I get this kind of left-right rotation. If I just move right, it's going to take it, extrude that distance up. If I take it to the left, it's going to take that distance down. You can see that the shimmering of these faces here is telling me that we're getting faces on top of faces, and this is the problem with the extrude tool that beginners to this tool will experience. And we just want to be aware that whenever I hit extrude, it's executed an extruded face. I'm going to hit enter to get out of that tool, or that doesn't work. I hit select to get out of that tool. I'm going to show you what I mean. If I select this face again and I hit the extrude tool, and I'm like, oh wait, I didn't want to do that, so I'm going to go back and hit select. I didn't want to extrude that face, I want to extrude this face. And I can drag this extrusion up as well, and it's like, look at, great, I've extruded faces. I'm clicking in my viewport to get out of that tool. The problem is if I come back and say, okay, now I'm ready to extrude this face up, as soon as you click on it, you've actually have created that surface. So I'll show you what I mean. When I extrude this up, you can see that now there's this line here from where that extrusion was before. And what happens is if I just select this face and hit delete, go into edge mode, double click this edge, W to my move tool, you can see that what happened was I had two faces on top of each other, and this creates a problem when we're exporting to Mudbox, is that we get errors because it needs to be cleaned up. There's vertices on top of vertices that aren't welded together. So this is the problem with the extrude tool that a lot of people who are new to this don't understand, is that as soon as I'll just maybe select a face. Oh, let me undo that. See, I already was in that tool. I'm just going Control Z to get back to. So this is what we have to be aware of. If I am guilty of that, so I hit the extrude tool, I have to go back to kind of previous usage. So back to select my face, hit the extrude tool. And this face is already extruded, so if I click off of here, I've extruded or I've executed that command of extrude face. So if I go back and select that face and move this out, it still acts the same way as an extruded face. So this is what we have to be aware of. And it just takes practice. If I do come to a point where I've modeled my face and it's not exporting to Mudbox, there are still things we can do. And one of the things we can do is back into object mode, F8, and go edit mesh, merge components. So anything that was extruded but was on top of itself, that should fix anything before we export to Mudbox. Alright, now we've got this out of the way, we can start modeling our self-portrait.